Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you can be utilizing this time to do something else, so we appreciate you spending your time equity with us. As always, if this information is valuable and you find it to be enlightening or worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and turn on notifications. That way you can be notified when each episode is released. And we do put out a new episode each and every Friday, which is heard on all podcast platforms. And then we also put a video out on YouTube as well for those who would like to watch the podcast. But in any event, as we always say, welcome and welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today I want to get into talking about some federal spending cuts that I am sure will affect someone listening to this podcast today, or if someone you know or a community that you've lived in or live in. So today I want to cover specifically some cuts that are occurring or have occurred through the USDA or at the USDA. For those of you outside the country, the USDA is our United States Department of Agriculture. And specifically, I want to talk about the cuts that are going on regarding the food programs that supply so many of the parents, I should say families and children, with not only food, but quality food, healthy foods. So I want to talk about that today because there's been a lot of changes that have been made as a result of that. And I feel like it's not getting enough attention. Now, I will admit there's been some national stories that have been done on this, but in the current environment that we're in, especially when you have so many polarizing stories that are constantly being flooded through, social media and through the news about, conflicts in other countries and foreign policy and so many other what I consider to be distractions. Stories like this kind of get a quick blurb and then they go under the radar. But this is going to affect so many different families and children this summer and definitely at the start of the new school year. So I want to make sure that I get this information out to people so that you're aware of it, A, and then B, for those of you who are going to be directly affected by it, or again, someone who will be affected by it, you can begin to make the necessary changes to try to adapt to what is currently going on as a result of these budget cuts. So when I talk about the budget cuts, I guess, first and foremost, let me give a little bit of a foundation about the USDA. So, the USDA oversees a lot in terms of meals. So they oversee school meals, what's going to be served, amounts, things of that nature in schools. And then also they oversee the SNAP program, which, for those of you who may not know, the SNAP program is what they call a supplemental nutrition assistance program. For older generations, you may know it to be as food stamps, but the USDA oversees these two programs, and these two programs are essential to providing, not only billions of dollars through their budgeting, but also, providing meals to literally millions of people throughout the country. And so the new administration has put into place over $1 billion worth of cuts that directly affect these programs. And, I want to kind of go through that a little bit in terms of what those cuts will look like, who that's going to affect, and then, go on for there. So the proposed budget itself, again, is going to slash funding for programs that provide everything from free and reduced lunch programs at schools, which is vital to many low income and vulnerable populations. Because for those who may not know, school is an essential part of many children's daily meal or eating practices. I mean, literally, you have children who live in communities that if they do not go to school, they will not eat that day. This is not just hyperbole or trying to say this for impact. This is factual, that there are children here in the United States that if they do not go to school, they will not eat. And then that goes on for summer programs as well. So many times, you'll have these children who, once school ends, and if there's no summer school program or, lunch program in their community, they may not eat that day. So these programs are very essential for that. And this proposed budget would slash funding for many of those programs. In addition, when you start to slash these type of programs, it's going to affect distribution in terms of what type of foods will then be replaced, because they'll be cutting back on these dollars, because these programs not only, provide obviously the food for these children and for these families, but they provide the types of food as well, healthy foods. So this is going to affect many of the local farmers and what other type of foods are being brought in. Matter of fact, CBS News talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where they talked to a school district in North Carolina, and they described this very thing. So let me play this from CBS News, and then I'll get a little bit into the actual numbers that are being cut. But this is a important piece. So I want to play this.
At Riverside High in Durham, North Carolina, the food is as fresh as can be.
So the cilantro and everything in here in this area is coming from local farmers?
Yes, we can receive local shredded carrots, cucumbers, lettuce, because we feel that we need to support people in our own communities.
Jim Keaton runs the district's nutrition plan and says much of this produce comes from local growers under a USDA program that's been cut by the Trump administration.
When you learned this funding was going away,
Immediately my thoughts were, what are we going to do? Because these are funds we use to provide local foods to kids.
Some of that food is grown here at Pine Knot Farms, about an hour's drive from Riverside High. With that funding, the farm sold $150,000 in produce last year to schools and to the local food bank. Linda Leach Hughes keeps the books.
what will the loss of that income mean for you?
It's devastating. If we do not have this extra income coming in to help local folk in the community, then we will have to lay folk off. We can no longer employ folk.
And that's an important aspect to it as well. So there were a couple of points there that I want to highlight. Number one, as was mentioned, that these programs that are being cut that will supply local farmers, or I should say will pay local farmers to supply quality foods, right? Foods that are rich in nutrients, fresh foods to these schools. Matter of fact, that takes me right to what I want to talk about in terms of the numbers. So the Trump administration announced that it will cut over $1 billion in federal programs that allow schools and food banks to buy fresh food from local farmers. And that's what that gentleman was talking about in that piece, as part of his ongoing effort to reduce government spending. This decision actually took place on March 10th, based on a statement from the Department of Agriculture. In terms of the amount of money that's being cut, first of all, you have $660 million that was removed from the local Foods for School program. And the local Food for Schools program is a program that provides funds to states for food assistance to purchase, as was said in that piece, foods from local farmers and distribution centers from local farmers, I should say, and ranchers, to provide to schools and child care centers. The purpose of the program was designed to strengthen the food system for schools and child care institutions. That is being cut. $660 million was cut from that, which again affects not only the quality of the foods, but also, as was noted in that piece from CBS Evening News, that affects the farmers themselves and the distributors who work in those areas, because now they have to cut jobs as well, because if the funding is not there, if the schools are not purchasing these healthier foods from these local farmers, they don't need the staff, which then creates a trickle down effect, right? Because now you have not only school staff that probably won't need to have jobs, especially if they're replacing a lot of the healthier fresh food for processed foods, because now you no longer need as many people to prep those foods, right? Because if you're bringing in boxed foods or canned foods, there's not much prep into that. But then also you're affecting the local farmers who employ people as well to pull those foods. So it's a trickle down effect. In addition, there's another $420 million that was slashed from what they call the Local Food Purchase Assistant Cooperative Agreement. And the Local Food Purchase Assistant Cooperative Agreement uses non-competitive cooperative agreements to provide funding for state, tribal, and territorial governments to purchase foods produced within the state or within 400 miles of the delivery destination to help support local and regional producers. And I'm reading this directly from the USDA site, just in case anyone is interested. Again, it says the purpose of this program is to maintain and improve food and agricultural supply chain resiliency. The cooperative agreements allow the states, tribes, and territories to procure and distribute local and regional foods and beverages that are healthy, nutritious, and unique to their geographical areas, and that meet the needs of the population. And I think those are key descriptions there that are unique to the geographical areas from which they are in, and also obviously within the state, because again, that provides cooperative economics, right? Allows the local farmers there to participate and also make money. And then in addition, you're providing foods that are regional based, right? Nobody wants to eat. Well, I shouldn't say nobody wants to eat. If you're hungry, you're hungry. But if you live in a certain state, you want to be able to enjoy some of those foods that are common to that state, as opposed to having things shipped in from other states. And then, of course, now you're dealing not only with cost, but you're also dealing with likability and things of that nature. But those two programs, out of that $1 billion that was proposed by the Trump administration, in terms of the USDA cuts, 660 was taken from the local food school program, and then the other 420 million was taken from the local food purchase assistant cooperative agreement. So these are huge, right? I don't want to, I want to make sure that I am emphasizing that, because these programs support well over 40 million people throughout the country. That's well over 10% of the population. And again, it's not just schools and child care programs, but then you start talking about SNAP benefits. You also start talking about programs that provide, in terms of like food banks that provide meals, and also food to low income and also vulnerable populations. So this is a huge story that definitely needs to get a lot of attention placed to it. Just to close out, in terms of other information, the cuts are also going to affect not only farmers, but then you also start to affect farmers of color, right? Because, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there has been a history in this country of discrimination against farmers of color, whether especially black farmers, and there's a whole history about that. But when you start talking about these cuts, many of these cuts are affecting farmers that were already struggling, right? Especially when you start talking about farmers of color. So these cuts do not in any way help that situation. They only go on to enhance it. Now, just on the flip side, people that are for this, right, in terms of not only Trump administration, but conservatives and many people that are who want more efficiency in government spending, which I have no problem with that. I want to be clear about that. Supporters have argued that the cuts that the USDA are experiencing is necessary because their budget has grown too large, and that the reforms were needed to reduce waste and promote self-sufficiency. And, interestingly enough, there are some lawmakers that are calling for even stricter requirements for SNAP and more flexibility for states to manage those programs. But, many have argued that the cuts are not just numbers on a page. As I said before, these cuts affect real people, real families. So this is not just, hey, let's take $1 million off the let's take $1 million off the books, and now all of a sudden, we've got a balanced book. This is really affecting people. And, once again, this is the country where, we're supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave and take care of ourselves. But we have to ask that question.
Now, the question I raise, is this America? The land of the free and the home of the brave?
I mean, I'm just saying, if we're going to be that, we have to take a little bit closer look at when we make these cuts about who these are really affecting. Because remember, not only do you take away healthy foods, when you take away healthy foods, now you increase the possibility, you increase the likelihood of more health issues in terms of diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure, which many of these vulnerable and low income communities already are suffering from. And these type of cuts, when you start talking about taking away quality food programs and just food programs in general, only lead to more of that, which is devastating for our entire country and the communities within the country. So that's what I want to talk about today. Like I said, I want to kind of, get this on the radar. And this is not a shot at the administration. This is not a partisan thing. All I'm doing is
presenting the facts.
That's it. But I do want to make sure that this is getting out there. And of course, the next step from here is to then get to your local officials, to get to your state officials, to start to enact and to push back on some of these cuts to see what can be reinstated. So that's the next step, right? It's not just me giving you the information. I'm giving you the information so you're aware, and then now you can take the next steps in your local communities to bring these concerns up, to see how we can reverse these things. Again, I'm not against efficiency in budget, but I don't want efficiency in budget to affect people in a negative way. So we have to come up with a more conclusive way that we can help reduce the budget, but at the same time not bring harm to people and individuals, especially in these vulnerable communities, which will ultimately affect them the most. But that's my time for today. Again, if you want to leave a comment, you can reach me at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram. You can also leave a comment at I Am Trey Evans on the YouTube when I post the video. But of course, all comments are welcome, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen or to watch the podcast today. But as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the people's voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.